The moment my phone rang and I saw Samantha's name flash across the screen, I had a feeling it wasn't going to be a casual, sisterly conversation. We weren't the kind of siblings who called just to catch up, and in my experience, whenever she reached out, it was because she wanted something. So I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever favor, request, or thinly veiled demand she was about to throw my way, and answered with as much patience as I could muster. Emily. Samantha's voice rang through the speaker, high-pitched and bubbling with excitement, the kind of over-the-top enthusiasm she usually reserved for things that only benefited her. Guess what? I have the most amazing news. You're going to be so happy for me. I leaned back in my chair, pressing the phone against my ear, already skeptical about where this was going. All right, I said, keeping my tone neutral, waiting for her to get to the point. What's this big news? I'm getting married, she practically squealed, as if the very words tasted like champagne and designer wedding dresses, as if she had been waiting her whole life for this moment, as if I should be just as excited as she was. Josh proposed last night, and I said yes. We're officially engaged. I exhaled, not entirely surprised, since Samantha had been obsessing over this proposal for months, dropping not-so-subtle hints about rings, Pinterest boards, and how she expected Josh to propose with a grand gesture. I didn't have anything against weddings or even against her getting married, but something about her tone made me wary, like there was an ulterior motive lurking just beneath the surface of her joy. Congratulations, I said, keeping my voice polite but not overly enthusiastic, because while I knew this was a big deal for her, I also knew Samantha well enough to recognize when she was building up to something. So, when's the big day? Well, she said, dragging the word out, the excitement in her voice shifting ever so slightly, taking on that familiar tone she used whenever she was about to ask for something outrageous. Josh and I have been talking, and we decided that we don't want just any wedding. We want something incredible, something that people will remember forever, something that just screams luxury. I could already feel the tension creeping into my shoulders, already sense where this was going, already bracing myself for whatever ridiculous expectation she was about to drop on me. So, she continued, voice dripping with that same entitled confidence I had spent my whole life dealing with, we're planning a destination wedding at this breathtaking resort in Bali. Private villas, ocean views, 5-star everything. It's going to be absolutely magical. I let out a slow breath, nodding even though she couldn't see me, waiting for the part where this became my
Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
problem. And obviously, she said, her tone bright and casual, like she wasn't about to say something completely insane. Since you make way more money than the rest of us, it just makes sense for you to pay for it. I blinked, my fingers tightening around the phone, wondering if I had misheard her, if maybe she was joking, if maybe this was just one of her tone-deaf, self-absorbed statements that she would laugh off a second later. Wait, what? I asked, my voice sharp with confusion. What do you mean, pay for it? I mean the whole thing, Samantha said breezily, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world, as if she had already made this decision for me and was now just waiting for me to nod along and agree. The flights, the resort, the catering, the flowers, the venue, the entertainment, and obviously an open bar. I mean, we want our guests to have an amazing time, right? I laughed, the sound escaping before I could stop it, because there was absolutely no way she was serious. You're joking, I said, shaking my head. You have to be joking. Samantha let out an exaggerated sigh, as if she was already annoyed that I wasn't immediately jumping at the opportunity to hand her a blank check. Emily, come on, she said, her voice taking on that patronizing, whiny edge she used whenever she wanted something. You're doing so well financially, and it's not like you have a family or kids or anything. You have all this money, and I just think it's only fair that you use it to help your own sister have the wedding of her dreams. I felt my jaw tighten, my pulse spiking with irritation, because I had spent years working my ass off to build a stable, successful career, years of long nights, early mornings, and sacrifices that no one in my family had ever acknowledged. And now, here was Samantha, acting like my hard-earned success was just some community fund for her convenience, acting like my financial stability somehow obligated me to fund her extravagant fairy tale wedding. No, I said simply, my voice flat and unwavering, because I wasn't going to entertain this for even a second. I'm not paying for your wedding, Samantha. The silence on the other end was brief but charged, like she couldn't quite process what she had just heard, like she had never even considered that I might say no. What do you mean no? She demanded, her voice escalating immediately, turning sharp and accusatory, as if I had just committed some unspeakable betrayal. I mean no, I repeated, my patience already wearing thin. You and Josh want a destination wedding? Then you and Josh can pay for it. Samantha let out a frustrated noise, the sound of her nails tapping against something hard coming through the speaker, her irritation boiling over with every passing second. You're seriously being this selfish? She snapped, her voice dripping with disbelief. You make 6 figures. This would barely make a dent for you. I can't believe you're seriously going to let money come between us like this. I laughed again, but this time it was colder, sharper, void of any amusement. Oh, that's rich, Samantha, I said, shaking my head. You're the one trying to guilt-trip me into paying for your entire wedding, and somehow I'm the one letting money come between us? She huffed, her anger building, her voice turning high-pitched and shrill. I always knew you were selfish, she spat. But I didn't think you'd actually let your own sister down like this. I felt something settle inside me then, something calm and final, because I had expected this reaction, had known exactly how this would go, had seen this same pattern play out 1,000 times before. Well, I said, my voice cool and unbothered. Now you know. And with that, I hung up, not waiting for her response, not willing to waste another second of my time justifying why I didn't owe her anything. I knew this wasn't over. But I also knew she had no idea what was coming next. The silence stretched for days, an eerie calm that I knew wouldn't last, a temporary truce before the inevitable storm. After our phone call ended, I had half expected Samantha to immediately bombard me with more messages, trying every possible angle to manipulate me into changing my mind. But instead, there was nothing. No guilt trips, no fake apologies, no desperate attempts to make me feel like I had somehow failed as a sister. That silence alone told me exactly what was happening behind the scenes, that she had already run to my parents, already spun the story in a way that painted her as the poor, innocent bride and me as the heartless villain who refused to support her own family. So when I finally heard from her again, I wasn't even surprised that she didn't bother with pleasantries, didn't try to sugarcoat her bitterness, didn't attempt to disguise just how entitled she truly was. Since you won't support this family, you're no longer invited to my wedding. Don't bother reaching out. That was it. No explanation, no hesitation, just a cold, final dismissal, as if my only value to her was tied to the money she thought she could squeeze out of me. I stared at the message for a long moment, waiting for even the slightest sting of pain, some flicker of regret, some old instinct pushing me to fix things, to smooth things over, to make sure I was still included. But all I felt was relief. She thought this was a punishment, thought that cutting me out of her big day would somehow make me realize the gravity of my mistake, thought that I would come crawling back, desperate to be part of her self-obsessed fantasy wedding. But what she didn't understand, what she had never understood, was that this wasn't some devastating loss for me. She had done me a favor. I set my phone down, exhaling slowly, already bracing myself for the next inevitable blow, because if Samantha was this petty, then I knew without a doubt that my parents were about to come crashing down on me next. And I was right. Less than an hour later, my father's name flashed across my screen, his calls relentless, one after another, as if I had just committed some unforgivable crime, as if I had just personally attacked the family in some irredeemable way. When I finally answered, his voice was already raised, already filled with that familiar disappointed authority, as if he truly believed he could lecture me into compliance, as if I was still some child who had to obey whatever the family decided was best. Emily, he started, not even bothering with a greeting, not even pretending this was a conversation rather than a one-sided condemnation. What is wrong with you? Your sister is devastated. You're really refusing to help your own family over a little bit of money? I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose, reminding myself to stay calm, to not let him drag me into another exhausting, circular argument where no matter what I said, I would always be the one in the wrong. It's not a little bit of money, Dad, I said evenly, forcing my voice to stay level, refusing to rise to the bait. It's tens of thousands of dollars for a wedding that isn't mine. She's not entitled to my money just because she decided she wants an over-the-top destination wedding. My father scoffed, the sound dripping with dismissive frustration, like he couldn't believe I was standing my ground, like he truly didn't understand why I wasn't bending over backward to accommodate the golden child of the family. She's your sister, he snapped, as if that alone was supposed to justify everything, as if that single fact meant I owed her whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted it. And you make more than all of us. You're supposed to help when the family needs you. That's what family does. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat, shaking my head at the sheer absurdity of it all, because there it was, laid out in plain terms, the unspoken truth that had dictated my entire childhood, the expectation that had always been there but never directly said. My success wasn't mine, it was theirs. My hard work, my sacrifices, my financial stability, none of it belonged to me. Because in their eyes, I had always been nothing more than a resource, something to be tapped into whenever they felt like it, something to be used until there was nothing left. I am not a bank, I said, my voice cold and firm, refusing to let him guilt-trip me into this. And I'm done letting you all act like I owe you my money, just because I worked harder for it than you did. That's not fair, he said, his voice sharp, but I cut him off before he could go any further, before he could twist the argument into something that made me the bad guy. No, I said, my patience officially gone, my exhaustion turning into something sharper, something stronger, something final. What's not fair is that you're all perfectly fine with Samantha demanding something completely insane from me, but the second I say no, suddenly I'm the bad sister, the selfish one, the one ruining the family. But not once in all of this have you asked yourselves why you think it's okay to expect this from me in the first place. There was a long, loaded silence, one that told me he didn't have an answer, that he knew I was right, but that he would never admit it. You should be honored to help your family, he finally said, his voice lower now, more controlled, but still laced with the same underlying expectation of obedience. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head, feeling something inside me snap completely. Then maybe, I said, my voice quiet and deadly calm, Samantha should have picked a family that actually deserved it. And then I hung up. I knew they weren't done with me, knew this wouldn't be the last time they tried to manipulate me, knew that this was just the beginning of the storm. But as I scrolled through social media later that night, seeing Samantha's latest post, my amusement far outweighed any lingering frustration. So excited for our exclusive wedding celebration. Can't wait to spend our special day surrounded by our closest friends and family. The caption might as well have been a direct message to me, a passive-aggressive way to rub it in, to let me know that she didn't need me, that I was officially cut out for refusing to pay her way. I took a sip of my wine, staring at the post, feeling more entertained than upset, because if Samantha thought she had won, if she thought she had humiliated me, if she thought this was the end of the story, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I held the one thing that could ruin her perfect wedding before it even began. The first time I heard Samantha bragging about how she had pulled some strings to secure her exclusive dream venue, I nearly choked on my coffee, not because I was surprised by her exaggerated sense of self-importance, but because she had absolutely no idea how wrong she was. The way she spoke about it, weaving some elaborate fantasy about charming the manager and negotiating like a pro, was so ridiculous that I had to physically stop myself from laughing out loud. She had no idea, none at all, that the only reason she even had that booking was because I had already paid for it months ago. Back before all of this, before she had thrown a tantrum over me not funding her entire lifestyle, before she had officially declared me the outcast of the family, before she had made it abundantly clear that I was only valuable to her if I was handing her money, I had actually been happy for her. I had figured, sure, we weren't close, and sure, she had always been entitled, but this was a wedding, a once-in-a-lifetime thing, and maybe, just maybe, I could do something meaningful for her. So I had reached out to the resort early, long before Samantha and Josh had even started locking in details, and put down a massive deposit to secure the venue for her as a surprise, planning to tell her when the time was right. But then she had demanded that I pay for everything. Not asked, not hinted, but outright demanded it like it was her birthright. And the moment she had shown her true colors, the moment she had banned me from her wedding for refusing to be her personal ATM, I had let that little fact slip quietly from my mind. Until now. Because the truth was Samantha didn't pull any strings, didn't make any brilliant negotiation moves, didn't lock in anything herself. She had been given a gift she had no idea she still didn't fully own. The contract, the deposit, the reservation, all of it was still under my name. And that meant I had the legal right to cancel everything whenever I wanted. I sat there for a long time, listening to her gloat to her friends about how people would die to have this venue, but I made it happen because I know how to get what I want, and I realized something that nearly made me giddy with amusement. She still believed she had won. She truly thought she had shut me out, cut me off, humiliated me by banning me from her wedding, convinced herself that I was sitting somewhere miserable, regretting my choices, desperate to be included again. And all the while, she had no idea that the very foundation of her dream wedding was built on something I controlled. The realization hit me like a lightning bolt, electrifying in its clarity, sharp in its poetic justice, delicious in its inevitability. I had never planned to get revenge on her, never thought of ruining her wedding out of spite, had never been the kind of person to seek payback just for the sake of it. But as I sat there, watching her bask in her own arrogance, hearing her talk about how some people just don't understand what it means to have a real family, I knew without a doubt that this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about teaching her a lesson she would never forget. I could have canceled it right then and there, could have made the call, could have wiped the entire thing off the books just to watch the chaos unfold immediately. But something inside me told me to wait, to be patient, to time this perfectly. Samantha had spent her entire life getting exactly what she wanted, using people, taking from them without ever thinking of the consequences, assuming that there would never be a moment where someone told her no. She had spent years believing she was untouchable. And now she was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. I let the days pass, scrolling through her endless social media updates about how perfect everything was coming together, reading the comments from her equally shallow friends gushing over how it's going to be the wedding of the century. I watched as my parents continued to defend her, continued to act as though I was the villain in this story, continued to send me messages about how family means sacrifice, and one day you'll regret being so selfish. I didn't respond, because I knew something they didn't. I knew that the very thing they were celebrating was already slipping through their fingers. I knew that the moment Samantha realized what I had done, her perfect little world would come crashing down around her. And the best part? She wouldn't see it coming until it was far, far too late. The days leading up to the wedding were filled with an endless stream of social media updates, each one more nauseating than the last, each one drenched in the kind of over-the-top bragging that made it painfully clear that Samantha believed she was about to have the most extravagant, awe-inspiring, envy-inducing wedding of all time. Every post was a parade of perfection, a curated glimpse into what she wanted the world to believe was a fairy tale romance, a flawless event that would have people talking for years. Only 1 week left until I marry my best friend at the most beautiful venue in the world. She gushed in one post, a dramatic black and white photo of her posing in a designer bridal robe, holding a champagne glass like she had been cast in some kind of bridal reality show. The comments flooded in instantly, filled with, "OMG, you're going to look like a queen," and "so jealous. That resort is unreal," and "you deserve every bit of this, babe." And all the while, I sat back, watching, waiting, calculating, knowing that none of these people had any idea that every single one of her plans was about to go up in smoke. My parents, of course, continued their campaign of guilt-tripping, doubling down on their efforts to break me, convinced that I would eventually fold, convinced that the big day approaching would force me to come to my senses, convinced that I would suddenly be struck with some overwhelming sense of duty and rush in at the last second to save the day. "Emily, you've made your point," my mother said in one particularly condescending voicemail, the exhaustion in her voice as calculated as ever, designed to sound heartbroken but carefully laced with the same old expectations. "But are you really going to let your sister struggle on her wedding day just because of a petty argument?" A petty argument. That was how she saw this. That was how they all saw this. Not as Samantha demanding tens of thousands of dollars from me, not as a pattern of lifelong entitlement, not as years of favoritism and selfishness finally reaching their boiling point, just as a petty argument that I, as the bigger person, should be the one to resolve. "She's family, Emily," my father had texted, as if that was some kind of magical statement that erased every awful thing they had done, as if those 2 words alone were reason enough for me to throw away my pride, my dignity, and my hard-earned money, just to make their lives easier. I didn't respond, because, at this point, there was nothing left to say. Instead, I watched as the deadline for the venue cancellation inched closer and closer, each passing day making Samantha's inevitable downfall more and more satisfying, each moment bringing me closer to the second her world would collapse right in front of her. I could have done it earlier, could have made the call weeks ago, could have shut everything down long before she had the chance to get comfortable in her illusion of security. But something in me, something cold and calculated and absolutely ruthless, told me to wait, told me to let her enjoy the anticipation, let her believe that everything was going exactly as planned, let her sink deeper and deeper into her fantasy before yanking it all away in one clean, devastating moment. So I waited. I let her post more ridiculous countdowns, let her gush about the designer dress she had picked, let her humble brag about how she had worked so hard to make her dream wedding come true, let her bask in the attention, bask in the compliments, bask in her own inflated sense of self-importance. And then, exactly 7 days before the wedding, with 1 week left until the moment she had built her entire personality around, I picked up the phone, dialed the number for the resort, and made the call. "Yes, hello," I said, my voice smooth, calm, completely devoid of hesitation. "I need to cancel a wedding reservation under my name." Samantha arrived at the resort with a kind of confidence only the truly entitled possess, gliding into the lobby like she was royalty, her fiancé Josh trailing behind her, carrying a designer suitcase that she had probably forced him to hold for her. She had been documenting every moment of her arrival, posting videos of herself twirling in the grand entrance, sipping a ridiculously overpriced cocktail by the infinity pool, flashing her diamond ring in perfectly posed selfies with captions about how everything is coming together perfectly, just like I knew it would. She had no idea that, behind the scenes, her perfect wedding had already crumbled into nothing, no idea that the staff she had spent months bossing around would, within hours, be delivering news that would leave her entire fantasy in ruins. The first sign of trouble came when she tried to confirm last-minute details with the concierge, waving her manicured hand impatiently when she asked about the exact time the event coordinators would be setting up the reception area. The poor man behind the desk hesitated, clearly unsure how to break the news, his eyes darting toward the back office, as if silently begging for backup. "Ma'am," he said carefully, his tone far too hesitant for Samantha's liking, "let me just check on something real quick. If you don't mind waiting here for a moment?" Samantha sighed dramatically, already rolling her eyes, already acting as if she had been personally inconvenienced in some unforgivable way. "Ugh, seriously?" she muttered to Josh, crossing her arms like a bratty teenager. "This is why I wanted to handle everything myself. People always mess things up when you trust them with important details." Josh, who looked like he had long since given up on having opinions, just nodded mindlessly, probably counting down the minutes until he could drink himself into oblivion at the rehearsal dinner. The manager arrived a few moments later, an older gentleman with a calm, professional demeanor, the kind of man who had probably dealt with dozens of nightmare brides in his time. But even he seemed a little uneasy, adjusting his tie, choosing his words carefully, bracing himself for the storm that was about to hit. "Miss Bennett," he started, his voice smooth and even, trying to ease into what he knew would be a full-scale meltdown. I'm afraid there's been a bit of an issue with your wedding booking. Samantha's entitled smirk vanished instantly, her entire posture stiffening, her fingers tightening around the phone she had been using to document every second of this trip. What do you mean an issue? She snapped, her voice sharp, her perfectly applied lipstick barely hiding the tension building behind her clenched teeth. The manager exhaled slowly, nodding toward one of the nearby seating areas, silently suggesting that they move this conversation somewhere more private. But Samantha wasn't interested in being discreet, wasn't interested in handling this like an adult, wasn't interested in anything other than getting exactly what she wanted. Just tell me what's going on, she demanded, her voice carrying across the entire lobby, ensuring that every guest in the immediate area could hear her. I don't have time for issues right now. The manager pursed his lips, clearing his throat, mentally preparing for impact. Your wedding. He hesitated, glancing down at his clipboard as if double-checking the nightmare he was about to unleash. Your wedding no longer exists. The silence that followed was absolute. For a moment, Samantha didn't react at all, didn't blink, didn't even seem to process the words, as if her brain had just refused to compute the information entirely. What? She finally said, her voice dangerously quiet, her fingers gripping the edge of the concierge desk so tightly that her knuckles turned white. What the hell does that mean? The manager kept his tone neutral, refusing to let her emotional state rattle his professionalism. Unfortunately, the reservation was canceled last week. The deposit was refunded to the original pair, and as of now, there is no scheduled event under your name. Samantha's entire face went ghost white, her carefully done makeup suddenly looking almost clownish against the sheer horror spreading across her expression. Josh, who had been staring at his phone the entire time, finally looked up, glancing between Samantha and the manager, frowning like he had just half-heard something unsettling. What does he mean canceled? He asked, his voice flat with confusion, like his brain hadn't quite caught up yet. Samantha ignored him entirely, turning back to the manager like a wild animal backed into a corner, her voice rising in pitch, becoming shriller by the second. That's impossible, she practically screeched, causing several people nearby to turn their heads. I didn't cancel anything. We paid for this months ago. Everything is scheduled. My wedding is tomorrow. The manager, completely unfazed by her outburst, simply nodded, his expression remaining carefully neutral and unreadable. Yes, Miss Bennett, but the contract was under the name of the person who made the original payment, and they exercised their right to cancel within the refund window. And that was the moment it finally clicked. I wasn't there to see it in person, but I knew exactly what it must have looked like. The exact second Samantha's rage transformed into slow, dawning horror. The exact second she finally put the pieces together. The exact second she realized who had paid for her dream wedding in the first place. Emily. Her useless, selfish, stingy older sister. The one she had banned from the wedding. The one she had spent weeks mocking online. The one she had cut out of her life without hesitation. That was the person who had made all of this possible. And now, that same person had just taken it all away. Samantha snapped into action, her hands shaking as she grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling over the screen as she scrolled through her contacts, her breath coming in panicked gasps as she hit the call button. The screen lit up with my name. The phone rang once, then twice, then 3 times. Her call went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. And then again. Voicemail. I sat in my living room, sipping my coffee, watching my phone light up over and over again, Samantha's name flashing angrily across the screen like a distress signal. I let it ring. I let her sit in her own disaster. Let her realize what she had done. Let her finally feel what it was like to be completely and utterly powerless. And then, when I had had enough, when I was sure she was on the verge of complete emotional collapse, I picked up my phone, hovered my finger over the voicemail transcription, and played back the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Samantha's panicked, furious, screaming voice, shrieking one final, desperate question into the void. What did you do? The moment the reality of the situation truly set in, The moment Samantha fully understood that this wasn't some minor inconvenience that could be smoothed over with her usual brand of entitled demands and self-absorbed tantrums, the meltdown began. It wasn't just frustration, wasn't just panic, wasn't just a bride dealing with a last-minute problem. This was pure, unfiltered rage, a complete and utter mental unraveling right in the middle of a five-star luxury resort, an absolute public spectacle unfolding before horrified guests and bewildered staff. The resort manager had tried to remain professional, had tried to offer alternative options, had tried to explain in his perfectly calm and measured tone that there was nothing he could do, had tried to get Samantha to take the conversation somewhere more private so as not to cause a scene. But Samantha, in all her self-important, entitled glory, had no intention of handling this with grace. "I don't care what your stupid policies are," she screamed, her voice carrying across the lobby like an emergency siren, her face flushed with sheer humiliation, her perfectly curated bridal glow now distorted by streaks of smudged mascara and pure, undiluted fury. "You need to fix this. Call whoever you need to call, and fix it." The staff, clearly accustomed to handling difficult guests, remained polite but firm, repeating the same answer over and over again. There was nothing to fix because there was no longer a wedding to hold. Meanwhile, Josh stood beside her, looking half embarrassed, half checked out, like he had already accepted his fate as a man who had signed up for a lifetime of being emotionally held hostage by his wife's meltdowns. He kept rubbing his hands over his face, sighing heavily, muttering things like, "Babe, please just calm down for a second," which only seemed to fuel her hysteria even more. And then, just when things couldn't possibly get worse, the guests started arriving. One by one, family members, friends, acquaintances, and co-workers, all dressed in their finest, stepped through the entrance, expecting to be welcomed into a stunning, fairy tale wedding experience, only to be met with chaos. There was no check-in table, no greeters, no itinerary, no drinks being offered on silver trays, no carefully curated wedding magic filling the air. There was just Samantha, standing in the middle of the room, red-faced and shaking, yelling at the resort staff like a lunatic, while Josh stood there looking like he was contemplating jumping into the nearest body of water and never resurfacing. Confusion spread like wildfire as guests exchanged awkward glances, whispering among themselves, realizing that something was seriously wrong. A few of Samantha's bridesmaids, still clutching their luggage, approached cautiously, their expressions shifting from excited to horrified as they tried to get a coherent answer out of her. Sam?" one of them asked hesitantly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, her voice careful, like she was trying to avoid triggering a live grenade. "What's going on?" Samantha spun around so fast that for a second it looked like she might actually collapse under the weight of her own meltdown. "What's going on?" she shrieked, throwing her arms up as if she had just been asked the most idiotic question in human history. "What's going on is that my wedding has been cancelled and nobody will tell me why." Silence. The kind of silence that only follows a public disaster, so huge that people are too afraid to react. It wasn't until one of the resort employees bravely stepped forward, glancing between Samantha and Josh, choosing his words as carefully as a bomb technician handling live explosives, that the situation truly spiraled into its final form of absolute, catastrophic destruction. "Miss Bennett," he said, hesitating just enough to make everyone watching feel the unbearable tension of what was coming next. "I was told by our booking department that the event was initially arranged under a different name. The deposit was refunded to the original pair, meaning the cancellation was made by someone with full authority over the contract." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Samantha's expression twisted, her brain frantically catching up, the gears turning in real time as she pieced it all together, as she finally understood. And then, as if the realization itself had physically knocked the breath out of her, her entire body went rigid, her lips parting in horrified recognition. "Emily," she whispered, the word barely escaping her throat. Josh, clearly having zero clue what that meant, turned to her, brows furrowed. "Wait, what? What does your sister have to do with this?" Samantha's face morphed into something monstrous, something wild, something completely unhinged. She did this. She spat, her voice dripping with venom, her entire body trembling, her hands balling into fists at her sides as she let out a near-primal screech of rage. That bitch did this. As if on cue, my phone began to ring, my mother's name flashing across the screen, the first of many incoming calls that would soon follow. I let it ring. Then came a call from my father. Then another from Samantha. Then more. One after another, a relentless flood of desperate attempts to reach me, as if somehow, if they could just get me on the phone, I would magically undo everything and save them from the disaster they had created. Finally, after about the 10th call, I exhaled slowly, picked up my phone, and answered. Emily. My mother gasped before I could even say a word, her voice raw and frantic, her usual composed demeanor completely gone. Please, you have to fix this. Samantha is having a breakdown. The guests are here, the wedding. I leaned back against my couch, staring at my reflection in the darkened screen of my TV, a small smirk playing on my lips as I let her words spill out, let her beg, let her plead, let her finally realize what it felt like to have absolutely no control. And then, when she finally paused to breathe, I said the words I had been waiting to say for a very, very long time. You told me I should be honored to help my family, I said, my voice smooth, slow, deliberate. But Samantha made it clear I wasn't part of this family anymore. So I just made sure she got exactly what she wanted. Silence. For the first time in my life, my mother had absolutely nothing to say. The second my mother realized she couldn't manipulate me into fixing this disaster, her tone shifted from frantic begging to cold, simmering disappointment, the same kind of tone she had always used whenever she wanted to make me feel like I was the villain for setting boundaries, for refusing to be the family's personal ATM, for daring to say no instead of obediently falling in line. We didn't think you'd actually let this happen, she finally said, her voice tight with strained control, like she was genuinely baffled that I had gone through with it, that I had refused to cave, that I had actually let Samantha's perfect day collapse into nothing. I let her words hang in the air for a moment, let them sit there between us, let her hear the weight of her own entitlement, let her realize that, for the first time in her life, her disappointment had no effect on me. And then, with absolute calm and certainty, I responded. I didn't ruin her wedding, I said, my voice steady, sharp as glass, cold as steel. She did. Silence. The kind of silence that only follows the undeniable truth. I could almost hear her struggling to come up with a response, could almost feel her grasping for another excuse, another way to twist this around, another attempt to somehow make this my fault instead of Samantha's. But there was nothing she could say, no argument she could make, no carefully worded guilt trip she could craft that would change what had already been set in motion. And then, just as I expected, the phone was yanked out of her hands, the muffled sounds of scuffling coming through the receiver, followed by the unmistakable, hysterical voice of my sister. You psychotic, selfish, jealous bitch. Samantha shrieked, her voice so high-pitched and frantic that for a second I actually had to pull the phone away from my ear. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? Her words were broken, shaking with rage, her breath coming in uneven gasps, her entire world crumbling beneath her, and I could picture her perfectly, standing in the middle of the ruined wedding venue, her expensive bridal gown now nothing more than a costume in a show that would never happen, her perfect little fantasy shattered beyond repair. I could hear people in the background, her bridesmaids whispering, the resort staff awkwardly trying to distance themselves, Josh probably standing there like an absolute idiot, wondering how he had gotten himself into this mess, realizing that this was just a preview of what the rest of his life was going to look like. I didn't say anything at first, just let her scream, let her spit venom, let her lash out in sheer, unfiltered rage, because I wanted her to feel every second of this downfall, wanted her to finally understand what consequences felt like. You ruined everything, she sobbed, the hysteria in her voice bordering on madness, the realization that she had officially become the laughingstock of her entire social circle sinking in with every breath. I hope you're happy, you evil, jealous loser. I hope you. I cut her off with 4 simple words, my voice so calm, so eerily measured, that it stopped her mid-sentence. "You banned me, remember?" Silence. A silence so thick and loaded that for a second, I thought the call had disconnected. "You didn't want me at your wedding?" I continued, my voice steady, unwavering, completely unshaken by her breakdown. "You made that decision the second I refused to be your personal bank. You told me I wasn't welcome. You made sure I knew how exclusive your guest list was. You posted online about how much better your life was without me. You wanted me gone." I let out a slow breath, leaning back against my couch, letting the moment stretch, letting her sit in the unbearable weight of her own choices. "So, I just made sure you got your wish." Another long pause, the kind that felt bottomless, endless, suffocating. I imagined her standing there, gripping her phone so tightly that her perfectly manicured nails were digging into her palm, her breath hitching, her mind racing, her last hope of fixing this slipping through her fingers. And then, for the first time since this disaster had begun, Samantha had absolutely nothing to say. No more screaming. No more insults. No more demands. Just silence. The weight of it pressed through the phone, heavy and thick and absolute. The sound of a woman realizing, truly realizing, that she had done this to herself. I waited a moment, just to let it all sink in, just to let her stew in the mess she had created, just to let her feel the full extent of what had just happened. And then, just as calmly as I had answered, I hung up. No goodbyes. No last words. No apologies. Nothing. Because I had already said everything that needed to be said. By the time I woke up the next morning, Samantha's wedding disaster had already begun to spread like wildfire, the news traveling through social circles, text chains, and social media posts at a speed that even I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just a minor hiccup, wasn't just an oopsie moment that could be swept under the rug. It was a full-blown catastrophe, a once-in-a-lifetime implosion that people wouldn't stop talking about for years to come. I scrolled through my phone lazily, sipping my coffee, letting the absolute brutality of the internet wash over me, letting the sharp, vicious gossip do the work for me. Wait, so you're telling me she planned a huge, expensive destination wedding and then showed up and there was a no wedding? Imagine making your entire personality about being a bride and then your wedding doesn't even exist. I'd have to move to another country. I was a guest at this wedding, and let me just say, I have never witnessed a public meltdown like the one I saw yesterday. Someone please explain how a bride manages to lose her own wedding. The comments were endless, relentless, merciless, and the more I read, the more I realized that Samantha had officially done what I had never even planned for her to do. She had made herself a spectacle. She had spent so much time making sure everyone knew how exclusive, expensive, and perfect her wedding was going to be that now, people weren't just hearing about what had happened. They were dissecting it, laughing at it, turning it into a cautionary tale. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger. She had done this to herself, had made sure everyone knew about her big, lavish plans, had gone out of her way to brag, had made sure the world was watching, had ensured that when everything came crashing down, it would happen in front of an audience so wide and so amused that there was no coming back from it. I had expected her to go quiet after the disaster, to disappear from social media, to at least try to control the damage, but instead, in true Samantha fashion, she went nuclear. One of her bridesmaids had leaked a voice memo, an absolutely deranged recording of Samantha sobbing and screaming, going on about how she had been set up, how someone had ruined her life on purpose, how there were forces working against her happiness. It was the kind of unhinged meltdown you could only expect from someone who had never faced consequences before, someone who had spent their entire life believing that bad things only happened to other people. And our parents? They were panicking, scrambling, grasping for any way to undo the humiliation they were now drowning in, because now, they weren't just dealing with a family argument. Now, their golden child had humiliated herself in front of everyone, and suddenly, the child they had cast aside was looking a whole lot more valuable. My mother left 3 voicemails in a row, each one dripping with forced regret, her voice carefully controlled, her words picked with the precision of someone who knew they had made a mistake, but still couldn't quite admit it. Emily, please, I know things have gotten out of hand. We don't want this to destroy our family. Samantha is just, she's emotional, but you know how much pressure weddings can bring. Can we just talk? I didn't call her back. My father sent a text, shorter, more desperate, more to the point, a man who had realized he had backed the wrong horse and had lost the entire race because of it. This has gone too far. Call your mother. I didn't call her, either. Because they weren't sorry for how they had treated me. They were sorry for what it had cost them. They were sorry because they had backed the wrong side. They were sorry because Samantha's meltdown had finally forced them to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, I was worth more than the money they had always expected me to hand over without question. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I booked a private vacation just for myself, a last-minute decision made on a whim, something I wouldn't have been able to do years ago when I was still shackled by their expectations. I picked a place far from all of them, a place where my phone wouldn't ring, a place where nobody would be looking for me, a place where I could breathe, really breathe, without the weight of my family's selfishness pressing down on me. And when I arrived at my secluded beachside resort, when I settled into the kind of peace that I had never known I could have, when I finally let myself enjoy the freedom of not caring anymore, I ordered a drink, sat back in my lounge chair, and toasted to myself. To every single time they had made me feel like I owed them something. To every time they had treated me like a walking wallet instead of a person. To every time Samantha had made me feel small while she stood on a pedestal built from other people's sacrifices. To every time I had bit my tongue, stayed quiet, taken the high road, only to be pushed further and further out of my own family. To every single moment I had spent wondering if I was a bad sister for not giving them what they wanted, when the truth was that they had been bad family to me all along. To the absolute joy of knowing that I would never be their ATM again. I took a slow sip, savoring the taste, letting it settle on my tongue like victory, like justice, like the best revenge I could have ever given them. And then, without a single regret, without a single doubt, without a single second thought, I blocked every single number in my phone. No more calls. No more texts. No more guilt trips. No more explanations. No more apologies. Nothing. Because I had already given them enough.
And now?
Now I was finally free.